Hello, I'm Philip Stoughton. I'm here at Apex 2020 and I'm joined by Ron Keith from the Supply Chain Resource Group. Ron, we talked extensively about the current supply chain disruption, but what we've seen over the last 12 months is a desire to have low-cost alternatives to China that maybe aren't some of the existing ones. And one of the ones that's coming up as significant in that is Vietnam. Tell me where you see Vietnam, what you think the benefits are, and what you as a group are doing to help companies that are interested in that region.
Vietnam has been on a lot of people's radar for a long time. I remember, it must be 10, 12 years ago, Foxconn announced that they were going to make a $5 billion investment. And Foxconn often announces $5 billion investments that sometimes fall a little bit short of that. But they set up some operations there, and they're reasonably good operations. I think one of the attractions of Vietnam is its proximity to the southern part of China, the Pearl River Delta. And so not only is there good ocean transport that's pretty quick, but there's a main highway that runs through there. And so you can move the final assembly and test and yet still have reasonably good access to the incoming raw materials, because Southeast China is the supply chain of the world for electronics. And so just picking up one small piece and moving it has some benefits, right? It mitigates a little bit of risk, it reduces a little bit of cost, but really what you want to be able to do is tap into that supply chain infrastructure and maybe over time even relocate portions of that. So I think its proximity to the Pearl River Delta area and the transportation to and from is one of the reasons that it's pretty interesting to a lot of companies.
Yeah, and when you look at one of the obviously logistics supply chain is a key part of that. Another is to have the skills and the infrastructure there to develop new skills, to build a workforce, and where that workforce sits in terms of cost. How developed is Vietnam in that area?
Yeah, I think the workforce is pretty good. It's just it's a matter of scale. So China has a workforce maybe 860 million people. I think Vietnam, if I'm not mistaken, is just a little under 80. And so the ability to go get 20,000 or 30,000 people in a month, like Foxconn, Pegatron can do when they're ramping up an Apple product or something, that's really not there. But we find the workforce to be very motivated, very hungry to go learn things, and in some ways it feels like China 15 or 20 years ago. Most of the people in China, including our employees, have never seen a quarter of negative GDP. They've never seen anything other than straight up and to the right. And so there's kind of this view that I'm always going to get a 7.5% raise no matter what. And I'm always going to get a bump in my title every 16 or 18 months. And you don't see that in Vietnam. You see a lot of people coming right out of school, just let me at it. What can I learn, and how do I learn more? And so that's pretty interesting, and that helps make up for some of it. But China has taken multiple decades to really get to the breadth of skills, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. I mean, China is going to be the world's factory for a very long time, but around the edges you're going to see Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, a little bit the Philippines pick up some of that work.
Yeah, and we've always had a pretty solid supply chain in Malaysia and Thailand. Philippines is a little bit more variable, I guess, but there's some really good facilities in Thailand and Malaysia that have just kind of pushed on steadily during the whole rise of China. Are they still very viable options for shifting manufacturing?
I think I mentioned yesterday in one of the panels on coronavirus, if you look at Wuhan is kind of shut in. Wuhan and the 17 cities around it, it's about 54 million people. The amount of workers in that area that are now not allowed to leave is a little more than 2 times the total workforce of Malaysia. So although Malaysia has got some great high-end manufacturing, and if you talk to most of the contract manufacturers, they will tell you that their best plant is in Malaysia. Jabil will tell you that, and Plexus will tell you that, and Flextronics will tell you that, and some of the Taiwanese won't necessarily say that because they're a little bit more concentrated in other places, but the capability is there. The question is, how much of that capability do you as an OEM need? And so, if you're a relatively small company and you're building something in modest quantities, it's going to be a pretty good option. I can tell you everybody's really jamming in Malaysia right now, and so just getting the mind share and being able to get a new product in there, unless they see, tremendous potential for it, it's a little bit of a battle. but it's very viable. Unless you need 60,000 people to build 10 million cell phones a month, and then it's a little bit challenging.
You guys have a great footprint down in Mexico, and that's an area where wage inflation has been much steadier than China. It's been consistent. Politically, it seems relatively stable. It feels like particularly Guadalajara, feels like a very safe place to be. Is that an industry that's still got plenty of growth in it?
I think it has. We've seen a lot more interest in Mexico when the trade war started. Not as much as I would have thought. A lot of people, their initial reaction was, Southeast Asia somewhere, and we've helped move a couple of people to Mexico. We're working on some additional transfers from China to Mexico right now. It's very viable, and for some products, if you need to do a lot of NPI, Guadalajara is a lot closer than Shenzhen. And the wages are on par. Now the productivity is a little bit less, in part because of infrastructure, in part because of the maturity of the industry and stuff. But Mexico is a very good alternative for a lot of different products, and I'm a little surprised that more people aren't looking at that.
Aren't latching onto it, and it's just proximity makes it very obvious. And the move from NAFTA to USMCA or whatever you call this. USMCA, has that been disruptive? Has that been positive? Are we now quite settled on that?
It's been a little bit disruptive, not the move, the uncertainty. Our current administration has, complained about NAFTA for 7 or 8 years. When I say our current administration, the President Trump, long before being elected, has said it was a terrible deal and we're going to fix it and we're going to throw it out. And so uncertainty is never good for business, and is certainly never good for I'm going to relocate my manufacturing or place new manufacturing somewhere where it's highly uncertain. And so not having USMCA done, not knowing who was going to ratify it, who wasn't going to ratify it, what the changes were, I think that was a very long pause button for new business going into Mexico. I think now that we're right on the cusp of everybody having it, and now that it's better understood, I think it's going to open up a little bit of a floodgate. There are some negative aspects to it for some industries. The automobile industry clearly is going to have some additional cost associated with it. Certain parts of USMCA are imposing, different worker standards, different benefit standards and stuff. And the numbers that I've seen from some of the think tanks say that imported cars coming from Mexico is going to add about $600 to a car. So I think that part of the business isn't going to be quite the rush that I think some of the electronics are going to see. But there's this pent-up electronics demand for, I think I'm going to move some stuff to Mexico that I think over the next year is going to be boom time. And
moving stuff across, and it's a pity on the automotive, because that's an area where their infrastructure and the whole OEM system seem to be building very, 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 very successfully and very rapidly. A lot more expertise in that area.
I think net it's good for everybody. Let's have all workers have a little bit more of a standardization of pay and benefits and stuff. And there's a difference between labor arbitrage and benefits arbitrage. Okay, they make a little bit less. Maybe we'll move some stuff down there, but arbitraging the fact that they have a much lesser benefit package, from a social responsibility perspective, feels a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that I've seen in the whole digital transformation is a lot of the large corporates are using Mexico as the pilots for those projects, because they are at reasonably high capacity and they can really test out digital transformation. So we're seeing a much more advanced industry down there than we saw even 5 years ago, I think.
And I think the hiring environment down there is relatively good. Everybody thinks about how populous China is, but we have been behind, my company has been behind on hiring in China for 10 years. Literally, we have never once been able to fill all of our positions. Now, we're a little bit picky because we also need language skills and things like that, but unemployment in China has just always been low. Opportunity has always been high. And, Mexico, there's a lot of talent that's readily available. The market for skilled labor is not as constrained. And so that also is really attractive to companies that are looking to ramp up new products or looking for a local or a regional alternative.
Yeah, and it's clear we're going through this regionalization thing, and I think that's valuable, and people are at the end of this current crisis will consider where best to be. So having all that information available through guys like you is hugely valuable. Ron, thanks for chatting. Always a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed being at the show this week, and we'll chat again soon. Thank you.
Sounds good.